Hello everyone and welcome back to another round of Tuesday Night Legacy where we showcase Magic's most powerful formats. My name is Eugene and I'll be your commentator for this round 4 from April 29th. On the left we have Eric playing a mono blue 8-cast list. This is a deck that likes to abuse the affinity mechanic by playing a bunch of 0-cast artifacts such as the following, and then casting either Thought Cast or Thought Monitor on the first couple turns of the game, getting a bunch of cards reloaded into their hand, playing a Psy Master Thopterus so you can continue to generate 1/1 tokens, or you can just play that Kappa Cannoneer, get him into play. He's effectively got hexproof with that Ward 4, and then is unblockable as long as an artifact has come into play that turn, so you just turn him sideways and the game is over. On the right, we have Mason playing a High Tide list. This deck is very different than the 8-cast list. It is also mono blue, but it tries to play a ton of spells on the same turn, getting that storm count up, mostly using this card High Tide to be able to make your islands tap for more mana per tap, and this card right here, Turnabout, which is going to untap all of your lands. So you play the High Tide, you play the Turnabout, your islands tap for a bunch more, you're looking for a bunch more cards with your Brainstorm, your Cunning Wish, and your Merchant Scroll, and finally, once your storm count is high enough, you go and get a Brain Freeze or a Blue Sun Zenith out of the sideboard in order to mill your opponent out. And if you make them draw their entire deck, then they can't draw any more cards and they lose on the spot. Gotta have a super high storm count for that, though. Or at least a super high mana count. I guess storm doesn't matter at all for the Blue Sun Zenith. Enough about the decks. Let's go ahead and get this going. We have Mason starting on the play here. Eric did have to go down to 5 before he decided to keep a hand. We see just a Mishra's Bauble come down and that Seed of the Synod, which is actually going to up Eric's affinity count already to start the game. We see him try to go for this Psy Master Thopterus here to get some early advantage, although it does catch the Mystical Dispute from Mason's side of the board, a very good card in the mirror, at least the blue mirror, as it costs 2 less. It's only a 1 mana leak in this situation. We see Mason fire off this Merchant Scroll here, grabbing a High Tide, which is basically going to help him combo off, making sure that these lands tap for a ton. See a Thought Cast on the other side of the board, just a pay 1, draw 2 cards. In this case, he had to pay a little bit more in order to make up for the affinity. Wasn't quite there yet. See the Mox Opal come down. Mason trying to resolve a Ponder. There's going to be a lot of cantrips on the High Tide side. Paying 1 mana spells to get as far into the deck as possible, upping that storm count. Always going to be important. See a bunch of lands come down. We know he has that High Tide. Might be thinking about firing off a Time Spiral. It's another way for the High Tide deck to kind of reload the hand, be able to untap all of those lands. Because if Mason High Tides right now, paying the 1 blue, he'll be able to have access to 8 mana if he sacks both of his fetch lands. Although he decides against doing anything, and we pass it back to 8-cast. This Urza's Saga having 2 counters. One of the ways that the 8-cast list can win is by just having a ton of artifacts in play and activating for these Karnstructs. We do see him sacrificing the Urza's Bauble, though, a very strange card. Actually forcing, we see what's happening here is it forces the player who sacrifices the Bauble to be able to see a random card out of the opponent's hand, but technically the opponent does not know what that card is. So it functions a lot easier in digital instead of in person, because you kind of have to put all the cards down, mix them up, close your eyes, have them see a card, mix them up again so you don't know which card that they saw. Ooh, a Cunning Wish here from Mason is getting a card out of the sideboard, and that card is Pact of Negation. Kind of a protection spell. Last-ditch effort. You do get a free counter spell but you have to pay 5 mana at the beginning of your next upkeep or you lose the game. So when players grab this card, it's kind of a signal saying that I'm going to win this next turn here, pretty much no doubt. I need to protect whatever my spell is that I want to resolve, but it's going to happen. We see the draw from the Urza's Bauble, and we see a High Tide go off. Try to Force of Will, fire off that Pact of Negation to make sure that it can go through. Useful for, even though there may be another Force of Will in Mason's hand, Force of Will creates active card disadvantage. So having that Pact ready to just fire off to trade for that Force of Will and have Eric go down an extra card is much better for Mason. We see a Brainstorm to start the turn. Looks like Eric does have access to exactly 5 mana. So if that last card is a Force of Will, looks like it's not. So we're going to see the Time Spiral go off here. Both players are going to draw their 7 cards, untap everything. Well, only the High Tide player gets to untap. Mason having access to 12 mana right now. We see the Storm count is at 4, 1 blue mana floating. This does reload the other blue player, so there is a potential that there's a Force of Will in Eric's hands now, but we will see. Firing off a Malevolent Hermit. This being able to counter spells by sacrificing it. We see a Flusterstorm go off to protect it from that Force of Will. Although in this situation, having the Hermit go to the graveyard may have not been a bad thing. If it just went to the graveyard, it wasn't being exiled, so Mason could have just cast it from the graveyard instead, and then all of his non-creature spells would have been uncounterable. So I'm not sure why he fought over it, but we do have that Malevolent Hermit in play, and I'm sure he will tell us in the comments his reasoning behind it. Ooh. All right, we have a second High Tide. Now, all of these islands are tapping for 3 blue apiece. We're seeing a Mission Briefing being cast. This card often gets compared to Snapcaster Mage for being able to cast a card from the graveyard, although this is a common misconception. It does not give the card flashback. It just allows the card to be cast from the grave. So if it has an alternate casting cost, say like Force of Will, being able to exile a blue card from your hand, it can be cast that way. We have the Storm count all the way up to 11 already. So if he Brain Freezes now, that'll only be 33 cards. Well, no, it'll be 12, so it'll be 35 cards. I think we see the Merchant Scroll going off here. There's a little bit of talk. Counting up the yard. So that is the Cunning Wish. There are no main deck Brain Freezes to protect against cards like Surgical Extraction. And we see the Brain Freeze, which is going to mill the opponent for 3 cards for each Storm counter, and that's going to be the whole deck. Eric goes to draw and loses the game. So we are on to game 2 here. Starting out with a pretty strong play from Eric, Chalice of the Void on 1 on turn 2. This is going to shut Mason off of primarily High Tide to start, and then all those cantrips. So until this Chalice can be dealt with, Mason's in a pretty tough spot. Eric trying to go for the Thought Monitor there, but it catches a Mystical Dispute. Can be cast for 1 mana, but its CMC is still 3, so the Chalice of the Void does not stop that spell. Eric in a pretty good spot here, as the Chalice barely affects his deck. I don't think he runs 1 to 2 1-mana spells, but they're both artifacts that combo with the Urza Saga package. Just see a Malevolent Hermit from Mason, and now we're back on Eric's turn, throwing down a couple artifacts. But he doesn't have any gas yet. He will with this Urza Saga once he starts activating it. Mason thinking, I could attack, but instead decides not to just throw it away, as this construct is already a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. Now 2 6/6s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep. It's going to be a 7/7 once this 0 or 1 mana artifact comes into play. Just another a Mishra's Bauble. The Mishra's Bauble being a good way to kind of reload your hand later in the game. They sit out there looking great with the affinity count being really high, but if you got nothing going on, you can sacrifice all these baubles to draw cards at the beginning of your opponent's next upkeep. The bauble right here in question. So one of these constructs can attack. I'm not sure why Eric passed it back to get in at least 6 damage on Mason, but decided against it. We're seeing a hard cast Force of Negation come down, which would have gotten rid of the Merchant Scroll. But once again, another Mystical Dispute, getting rid of that card. We see Mason actually goes for the Echoing Truth, a very strong card against the constructs, bouncing the non-land permanents back to hand. The constructs not being permanents, or being tokens, they don't exist once they are out of play. Ooh, getting hit for some huge damage here. The Otawara Soaring Sea, we saw the discard effect, bouncing the Malevolent Hermit back to hand, and all of that damage going through. Another bauble effect. Mason in a pretty tough spot now. Eric does have a bunch of cards, but he did get to fire off that Echoing Truth to get rid of those tokens. Sadly, after they dealt all their damage. Another one of those pay 1, get a free thought cast. Oh, here's the Kappa Cannoneer. This guy coming in as a 5/5, 6/6 now for all of these 0 mana artifacts. Another thought cast. And once an artifact does come into play, it cannot be blocked. So an extremely easy marker to fill for the 8-cast deck. And with this Emry in play, can actually just kind of tap the Emry and get a 0 cast from the graveyard. And that'll make it unblockable, and that's definitely going to be the game. Mason conceding, going to game 3. Just an island pass. Seat of the Synod. Couple artifacts coming down. That that Mox Opal getting that Chalice down, but we saw a Force of Will for it. Paying that last mana to try and get an Emry into play, and a Mystical Dispute for it. Mason having all the early game answers here. We're seeing a second Chalice trying to get in for 1, a Brainstorm in response. Mason's going to be in a pretty tough spot if he doesn't deal with this Chalice right here, but it looks like it does resolve, unfortunately. And we see an island off the top go. So Eric in a pretty sweet spot here. Doesn't have any threats yet. No gas to start applying pressure to the life total. But having that Chalice on 1 is actually immense in this matchup. Mason having so many 1-drop spells. 1-cast spells. Oh, goodness gracious. We see a Hull Breacher come down. If a player would draw a card, an opponent would draw a card, instead they don't, and you get a treasure. We're seeing the mission briefing being fired off here. This card immensely strong against the High Tide players. All they're trying to do is draw cards. So now Mason has 2 key threats he's going to have to deal with. Oh, the mission briefing was for the Mystical Dispute, but the Mystical Dispute was caught by a Force of Will, so that Hull Breacher will stay in play. Hull Breacher doing double duty here, basically shutting off a lot of Mason's outs by stopping him from drawing cards, but also dealing the 3 damage a turn, very similar to a Delver. Basically just have to wait 5 more turns. Kind of maintain this board lock state. And that'll be the game. Mason's going to have to find a couple ways to deal with these problematic permanents. Seeing a Cunning Wish. Maybe the answer's out of the sideboard. Ooh, that's a good one. We're going to see a Wipe Away. This can return target permanent to its owner's hand. This is kind of only good for the turn that it gets fired off, as soon as you fire it off, they can just, on their next turn, play it again. Wow, all sorts of threats coming down, a lot of cards. We see a Thought Monitor, a Thought Cast, a couple of baubles coming down. It's going to draw a lot of extra cards. 3 damage this turn, which is going to turn into 5 damage next turn. Oh my gosh. So baubles get sacked, and then more baubles get sacked. Going to be drawing more cards. Mason untaps. Eric reloads his hand on that upkeep, as the Hull Breacher does not affect him. Mason in a pretty tough spot here. I am impressed that he is not conceding in this situation, but maybe he can make something happen with this Wipe Away. Maybe 3 mana, Wipe Away, try to High Tide, Turnabout. I'm not sure. He's got to pay 3 mana to do the Wipe Away. We see a Merchant Scroll being fired off here. An Intuition. This is a fun one. Being able to find 3 cards and have your opponent choose 1 and put that into your hand. The other 2 go to your grave. Although the Intuition is going to catch a Force of Negation, so that card is gone for good. Mason's resources expended. 5 damage coming through, down to 4. This is Mason's last turn. Looks at his cards and just passes it back. An interesting play. We see the 5 damage coming through. Still has that Wipe Away, so he could still technically stay alive. Oh, we forgot about the Urza Saga Lore 3 trigger to go and get a 1 cast or a 0 cast artifact. Decided not to get any Constructs. Decided the team he has is good enough here. So just a bauble. We're going to Turnabout to tap creatures before combat. That is definitely a play. It's almost like a fog effect. Ooh, a Pithing Needle come down. Names the Flippy Boy, the Malevolent Hermit. So the Malevolent Hermit cannot be sacrificed to try and counter a non-creature spell. Passing it back again, not drawing any more land, which I feel like is kind of the thing that Mason needs here if he's going to come back. We see 3 more damage come through, and that Wipe Away is going to get fired off to get the Hull Breacher out of there and just go down to 2 from the 2 damage from Thought Monitor. Although not the most amazing play, as Hull Breacher does have Flash, so it can come back down if Mason tries to draw some cards here. And there's the Hull Breacher coming down in response to a Turnabout that basically just made a 1 storm count. Trying to Brain Freeze for a couple, and 2 Time Spirals in hand there. So that's going to do it for us. Thank you for joining us for that match. I hope you enjoyed it, showing the power of 8cast being able to play that tempo game just as well as getting in and just attacking for huge aggro damage. If you like this kind of content, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We are so very close to 200 subscribers that we only need just one new subscriber. You could be that subscriber and get us to 200 subscribers. Don't you want to be that person? I also want to thank Spellhold Games for allowing us to record this content at their store. Without them, we would not exist, so thank you for all of your patronage and support. Our next game is going to be round 3 from our Pauper tournament. I don't remember what the matchup is, but it should be going up shortly in the next day or 2. If you don't want to click below, you can just click on the subscriber button that's going to be on this video in just a few seconds. I think it's going to be right over there. See you next time.